The drill broke through the ice at exactly 0347 hours. And Dr. Elena Vasquez felt her heart stop. She had been sleeping in her tiny cabin when the alarm rang through the research station. And now she stood at the edge of the borehole with 11 alien scientists who barely looked at her, because humans were nothing to them. Just children playing at exploration while the real work happened around them. The Valith expedition leader, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 eyes that never blinked, pushed past her without a word and descended into the darkness below. Lena followed because that was her job. To follow and observe and stay quiet while the elder species did whatever they wanted with whatever they found. 3 kilometers beneath the frozen surface of Thyro 7. They found what should not exist. The chamber was massive, carved from ice that had been here for millions of years. And in the center of it stood a gate that made Elena's eyes water just from looking at it. It was not made of stone or metal or anything she could name. And its surface shifted and moved like water standing still. And the angles were wrong in ways that hurt to think about. The Valith scientists made sounds of excitement and immediately began setting up their equipment. While Elena stood frozen at the edge of the chamber, she could hear something. It was faint, like a whisper from another room, and it came from the gate itself. And the words were in a language she did not know, but somehow understood. The lead scientist, whose name was something Elena could not pronounce, activated his scanner, and the results made him laugh. Primitive construction, he announced to his team. Similar to the gateway artifacts on Velix Prime, likely from the 3rd expansion period. Elena looked at the readings on her own tablet and saw something completely different. Gate was not made of compressed matter or exotic metals. It was made of space-time itself, folded and twisted into a shape that held itself together through mathematics that should not work. "Excuse me," she said. And the Valith turned to look at her with the kind of expression one might give a dog that had suddenly spoken. "The human has something to say," the leader announced. And his team made sounds that Elena had learned were laughter. "Your readings are wrong," Elena said. And she held up her tablet. "This is not construction. This is manipulation of space-time at the quantum level. And your scanners cannot detect it because they were not designed to look for something like this." The Valith leader took the tablet from her hands and looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before handing it back. "Human instruments are primitive," he said. "You see patterns where none exist because your species has not yet learned to accept what you do not understand." Elena wanted to argue, but she knew it would do no good, because humans had only been in space for 300 years, while the Valith had ruled the galaxy for 400,000. And nothing a human said could matter to creatures who had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach. The conclave arrived 2 weeks later, 12 ships from 12 species, the most powerful alliance in known space, and they all wanted to claim the gate for themselves. The Valith matriarch herself came down to the chamber, a creature so old that she remembered when humanity's ancestors were still living in trees. And she declared that the gate belonged to her people by right of discovery and expertise. "We have seen such things before," she announced to the assembled representatives, "and we know how to control them safely." Elena stood at the back of the crowd and watched as the matriarch ordered her technicians to begin the activation sequence. The whispers from the gate grew louder. She tried to speak up, tried to tell them that something was wrong, but her voice was lost in the noise of machinery and alien languages and the absolute certainty of beings who had never been wrong about anything in thousands of years. The activation sequence completed at exactly midnight. The gate did not open a pathway to another place. Instead, it sent a pulse of energy outward, faster than light, deeper than space, reaching across the galaxy to a place that had been silent for 2 million years. Elena felt it like a scream in her mind, and she fell to her knees while around her the alien scientists celebrated what they thought was success deep beneath the galactic core. In a tomb of collapsed stars and dead worlds, something ancient opened its eyes. It had been sleeping since before the Valith existed, since before any of the elder species had evolved, since the beings who created it had realized their terrible mistake and done everything they could to bury it forever. But nothing stays buried forever. The thing in the darkness stirred, and it remembered what it was made to do, and it began to wake its brothers and sisters from their long sleep, back on Tiro 7. Elena stood alone in the chamber while everyone else returned to the surface to send their reports of success. The gate whispered to her, and this time she understood every word it told her about the ones who built it, the ones who had walked between stars when the galaxy was young, the ones who had made a terrible weapon and could not destroy it, the ones who had buried their shame and their guilt and their memory in the genetic code of a primitive species on a small blue world. Told her what humanity really was. It told her what was. Calling Elena's hands shook as she reached out to touch the surface of the gate. And when her fingers made contact, she saw everything. She saw the ancient war that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. She saw the weapons that could not be killed. She saw the desperate plan to bury them and forget. She saw the seeding of Earth with the descendants of beings who had once been gods. And she saw the signal that had just woken the sleepers from their tomb when Elena pulled her hand away. Her eyes had changed color, silver like starlight, and her mind was no longer entirely her own. She walked out of the chamber and found the Valith matriarch celebrating with her advisors. "You need to listen to me," Elena said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the air vibrate. The matriarch turned and saw Elena's silver eyes and took a step backward for the first time in centuries. "What are you?" The ancient creature whispered. Elena smiled, and it was not a human smile. It was older and sadder and filled with the weight of 2,000,000 years of guilt. "We are what you woke up," she said, "and we are so sorry for sleeping this long." The whispers from the gate grew into a song, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Kethvaran began their march toward the light. 6 months after the gate opened, the first colony went silent. It was a small world on the edge of conclave space, home to 3,000,000 Valith settlers who had lived there for 10,000 years. And one morning, their communications simply stopped. The conclave sent a patrol ship to investigate, and the patrol ship never came back. Then another colony went dark, and another and another. And within weeks, the pattern became clear to everyone except those who refused to see it. Something was moving through the spiral arm, and it was hungry. The Valith matriarch assembled the greatest fleet her people had ever launched. 800 warships crewed by the finest soldiers in the galaxy. Veterans of 100 wars who had never known defeat. The Phalanx fleet jumped to the coordinates of the last lost colony and found what had killed it. Elena watched the battle footage from her cell on Thyro 7, where the conclave had imprisoned her after her transformation. And she wept for what she knew was coming. The Kethvaran did not look like ships or creatures or anything that belonged in normal space. They were wrongness given form, twisted shapes that hurt to perceive, masses of dark matter and corrupted energy that moved through the void like predators through water. The Phalanx fleet opened fire with weapons that could crack plants. And the Kethvaran did not even slow down. They moved through the Valith formation like ghosts. And every ship they touched simply stopped existing, not destroyed but unmade, erased from reality as if they had never been built. 800 warships faced the enemy, and 11 minutes later, there were none. The footage ended with a Kethvaran entity turning to look directly at the recording drone, and Elena saw intelligence in its impossible eyes, ancient and terrible and filled with purpose. The conclave fractured. That same day species that had worked together for millennia turned on each other in panic, blaming one another for the disaster, fighting over resources and escape routes while the darkness crept closer with every passing hour. The Valeth Matriarch came to Elena's cell alone, without guards or advisors, and she looked older than Elena had ever seen her. "You knew," the matriarch said. "You tried to warn us, and we did not listen." Elena nodded, but felt no satisfaction in being right. Only sorrow for what was lost and fear for what was coming. "Tell me what they are," the matriarch demanded. "Tell me how to stop them." Elena closed her silver eyes and let the memories flow. The memories that had been locked in human DNA for 2 million years. "Waiting for this moment, they are called the Kethvaran," she said. "And they were not born. They were made." She told the matriarch about the beings who had come before. The ones who had mastered the galaxy when the stars were young. Who had grown so powerful that they thought they could create life itself. They had built the Kethvaran as weapons, as tools of war, as things that could unmake anything that opposed them, but they had made them too well. The Kethvaran could not be controlled, could not be reasoned with, could not be destroyed by any weapon their creators possessed. And when they turned on their makers, the war that followed nearly ended all life in the galaxy. "Our ancestors buried them," Elena said. "They used the last of their power to put the Kethvaran to sleep and seal them away in a tomb at the center of the galaxy. And then they did something desperate." "What did they do?" the matriarch whispered. "They erased themselves," Elena said. "They scattered their descendants across 1,000 worlds and wiped their memories and reduced themselves to primitives so that no one would ever know where the weapons were buried." She opened her eyes and looked at the matriarch with an expression that held 2 million years of guilt. "Humanity is what they became," she said. "We are the descendants of the ones who created the Kethvaran. And we forgot everything so that we would never be tempted to wake them up." The matriarch staggered backward as if struck. "But we woke them," she said. "We activated the gate and sent the signal." "Yes," Elena said. "And now my people must remember what we are. And we must finish what our ancestors could not." She stood up and walked to the door of her cell. And the locks opened at her touch because they were not designed to hold something like her. "The awakening has already begun," she said. "All across Earth, humans are remembering. And soon we will have the knowledge and the power to face what is coming." "Can you stop them?" the matriarch asked. "Can you destroy the Kethvaran?" Elena paused at the doorway and turned back to face the creature who had dismissed her as nothing for so long. "I do not know," she admitted. "Our ancestors could not destroy them, only bury them. But we are not our ancestors. And we have had 2 million years to change." She walked out of the prison and into a galaxy that was burning. And behind her, the matriarch fell to her knees for the first time in 400,000 years on Earth. The awakening spread like fire. A teacher in Tokyo suddenly knew how to build engines that could cross the galaxy in hours. A farmer in Kansas remembered tactics from wars fought before the sun existed. A child in Lagos spoke equations that described how to fold reality itself. Not every human changed, but millions did. And they shared their knowledge freely with those who remained unchanged. The governments of Earth watched in shock as their citizens began building impossible things. Weapons and ships and devices that should not work but did. And they realized that humanity had never been what they thought it was. They had been sleeping guardians, waiting for a threat that had finally arrived. Elena broadcast a message to every human on every world, her silver eyes shining with ancient light. "Children of Earth," she said, "we have slept for 2 million years, but now we must wake. Because our greatest mistake is coming home. And only we can stop it." The Kethvaran continued their advance, eating colonies and fleets and hope itself. And they did not fear the elder species, because they had been made to destroy such things. But when they felt the awakening on Earth, when they sensed the return of those who had created them, they paused for the first time since their tomb had opened. They remembered their makers, and for the first time in 2 million years, The weapons that could not be stopped felt something they had never felt before: fear. The United Terran Congress met in emergency session for the first time in human history, and the chamber was filled with people whose eyes had turned silver and whose minds held memories older than the stars. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin stood at the center of the room, a woman who had commanded a patrol frigate 3 months ago and now carried tactical knowledge from 10,000 wars across millions of years. The Kethvaran will reach Conclave core worlds within 6 months, she announced. And after that, they will turn toward Earth. The representatives shouted questions and demands, fear and anger mixing in equal measure. Because no one had asked to inherit the guilt of ancient gods, a man from Brazil stood up. A former construction worker, whose hands now knew how to build weapons that broke the laws of physics. Why should we fight? He demanded. Our ancestors made those monsters. Let the Conclave deal with them. Let them burn for waking what should have stayed buried. Admiral Chun looked at him with eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. Because running is what our ancestors did, she said. They buried their mistake and erased their memories and left the problem for someone else to solve. And 2 million years later, that someone is us. The room fell silent. We can hide, Chung continued. We can scatter across the galaxy and hope the Kethvaran never find us. And maybe some of us would survive for a few thousand years before they tracked us down. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembled leaders of humanity. Or we can do what our ancestors could not, she said. We can face what we made and end this war forever. A voice came from the back of the room. Old and tired and filled with the weight of centuries, Elena Vasquez walked forward through the crowd. And everyone moved aside because they could feel the power radiating from her like heat from a sun. I have seen what the Kethvaran truly are, she said. They were not always monsters. They were made that way. Twisted and corrupted until nothing remained but hunger and rage. What does that matter? Someone shouted. They are killing millions. It matters because it tells us how to stop them, Elena replied. Our ancestors tried to destroy them with force and failed. They tried to outsmart them and failed. They buried them because nothing else worked. She reached the center of the chamber and stood beside Admiral Chun. But they never tried to heal them, she said. The room erupted in chaos. Voices screaming that she was insane, that the Kethvaran could not be healed. That mercy was weakness and compassion was suicide. Elena waited for the noise to die down before she continued. I am not saying we should not fight, she said. We must defend ourselves and protect those who cannot protect themselves. But while we fight, we must also search for another way. The debate lasted for 3 days. And in the end, humanity voted to do both. They would build fleets and weapons and fight the Kethvaran with everything they had. But they would also study the enemy and look for the weakness that their ancestors had. Mystic construction began immediately. Ships grew from asteroids like flowers from seeds. Hulls of living metal that healed themselves and weapons that could tear holes in reality. Crewed by humans who remembered how to sail between stars when light was young. Within 2 months, the Terran Defense Fleet numbered over 1,000 vessels. And more were being built every day. The Conclave sent an ultimatum. The Valeth and 6 other species demanded that humanity surrender its awakened citizens and new technology for study and safekeeping, claiming that such power in human hands was too dangerous. Admiral Chun read the ultimatum aloud to her command staff and then deleted it without response. The Conclave Armada arrived at Seoul 3 weeks later. 4,000 warships from 7 species, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Admiral Chun looked at her 32 ships stationed to defend Earth and felt no fear. Only the calm certainty of someone who had fought battles like this 10,000 times before. They think they know war, she said to her crew. They have fought each other with rules and limits and the understanding that tomorrow they might be allies. She opened a channel to her fleet. "We remember a different kind of war," she said. "We remember what happens when survival itself is at stake. And we will teach them what they have forgotten." The Battle of Seoul began at dawn. The Conclave fleet advanced in perfect formation, confident in their numbers and their experience, certain that these upstart humans could not possibly stand against the combined might of 7 elder species. Admiral Chun waited until they were committed to their attack pattern before she gave the order. The human ships did not fight like anything the Conclave had ever seen. They folded space around themselves and appeared behind the enemy formation. They fired weapons that made ships simply cease to exist. They moved with coordination so perfect that it seemed like a single mind controlled all of them. The Conclave commanders tried to adapt, tried to counter, tried to retreat. But there was no adapting to tactics that had been refined over 2 million years of continuous war. 9 hours after the battle began, the last Conclave ship surrendered. Humanity had lost 11 vessels. The Conclave had lost everything they brought. Admiral Chun broadcast a message to the surviving aliens floating in their escape pods. "We did not want this fight," she said. "We have never wanted to fight anyone except the enemy that threatens us all. But we will not be bullied or controlled or treated like children anymore." She paused and let her words sink in. "Go back to your masters and tell them what you saw here," she continued. "Tell them that humanity remembers what it was, and we will not forget again. But also tell them that we offer friendship to anyone who wants to stand beside us against the darkness." The escape pods were collected and sent back to Conclave space. 2 weeks later, the first requests for alliance began to arrive. The HFY watched from the edge of the galaxy, and they felt something they had not felt since their creation. Their makers had returned. And these new humans were not running away for the first time in their existence. The weapons designed to be invincible considered the possibility that they might lose. Humanity did not just build ships. They grew them from seeds of living metal planted in asteroids and moons. And within 3 months, the Terran fleet numbered 10,000 vessels, crewed by humans who remembered how to fight. Wars that lasted longer than civilization's admiral. Chung Wei-lin stood on the bridge of the flagship, Remembrance, and watched the display showing enemy movements across the galaxy. The HFY had stopped their advance after the Battle of Seoul, pulling back to consolidate their forces and the systems they had already consumed. And Chun knew they were preparing for something. "They are afraid of us," said Captain Rodriguez, her second in command. "For the first time in their existence, they face enemies who know what they are." Chun shook her head slowly. "They are not afraid yet," she said. "They are curious. They want to understand how much we have changed before they commit to a full attack." She turned to face her crew, men and women whose silver eyes held the weight of ancient memories. "We cannot give them time to adapt," she said. "We must strike now while they are uncertain." The War Council convened on Earth, with representatives from humanity and the 12 species that had agreed to join the alliance against the HFY. Valith Matriarch sat at the table, beside human generals and admirals. And her presence there would have been unthinkable just 1 year ago. She had come to Earth herself, leaving her throne and her guards behind. And she had done something that no Valith had done in 400,000 years. She, Admiral Elena Vasquez, remembered that moment clearly. The ancient creature lowering herself before the Terran Congress and speaking words that changed everything. "We were wrong about humanity," the matriarch had said. "We treated you like children when you were our elders. We dismissed your warnings and woke the darkness that now threatens us all." She had looked up at the assembled humans with eyes that held genuine humility. "Teach us," she had said. "Please, teach us how to fight these things." And humanity had answered in a way that defined them forever. They did not gloat over the matriarch's submission. They did not demand payment or tribute or apology. They simply reached out and helped her to her feet. "Stand with us," Admiral Chun had said. "Not beneath us or behind us, but beside us. And together we will face what is coming." Now, the Alliance fleet gathered at the Threshold Nebula, the last line of defense before the Kethvaran could reach the populated core of the galaxy. 5,000 human ships flew beside 3,000 vessels from other species. And for the first time since the war began, the defenders outnumbered the enemy. The Kethvaran came in a wave of darkness that blotted out the stars themselves. Elena stood on the bridge of the Remembrance beside Admiral Chun, her silver eyes seeing things that normal sensors could not detect. "There are millions of them," she whispered. "More than we thought, more than we prepared for." Chun did not flinch at the news. "Then we will have to fight harder," she said. And she gave the order to engage the Battle of the Threshold. Was the largest conflict in galactic history. Ships on both sides numbered in the thousands, and the weapons they used were beyond anything the Conclave had ever imagined. Human vessels folded space around themselves to appear inside enemy formations, firing weapons that created miniature black holes and cascades of antimatter that consumed everything they touched. The Kethvaran fought back with their terrible power, unmaking ships and crews with a touch, adapting to every tactic and finding counters within minutes. Stars were used as weapons, collapsed and detonated to create shockwaves that destroyed hundreds of vessels on both sides. Entire systems were erased from existence, their matter and energy converted into fuel for weapons that should never have been built. The battle raged for 6 days without pause. Humanity and their allies lost 2,000 ships. The Kethvaran lost twice that many, but they kept coming because they could not do anything else. They were weapons, built to fight until nothing remained, and they did not know how to stop on the 7th day. Elena made her decision. She walked to Admiral Chun and spoke words that changed the course of the war. "I need a shuttle," she said, "and I need you to create an opening to the enemy command entity." Chun stared at her in disbelief. "That is suicide," she said. "The command entity is the size of a moon and surrounded by 1,000 of its children." "I know," Elena replied. "But I have seen something in the memories. Something our ancestors never tried because they were too afraid." She placed her hand on Chun's shoulder. "The Kethvaran were not always monsters," she said. "They were made that way, and what was made can be unmade." Chun wanted to argue, wanted to forbid this mission, but she saw something in Elena's eyes that stopped her. It was hope. "What do you need?" Chun asked. "Just an opening," Elena said. "And a chance." The fleet created that opening with everything they had, sacrificing ships and crews to punch a hole through the enemy formation that lasted exactly 90 seconds. Elena flew her shuttle through the gap and landed on the surface of the command entity, a living ship so vast that it had its own gravity and atmosphere. She walked across that impossible landscape toward the center, where she could feel the mind of the Kethvaran waiting for her. The entity spoke to her in a voice that was not sound but pure thought, ancient and terrible and filled with hunger. "You are one of them," it said. "One of the makers who created US and then abandoned you." Elena did not flinch from the accusation. "Yes," she said. "My ancestors made you, and what they did was wrong. They made US to destroy," the entity said. "They built US without mercy, without compassion, without anything but the need to unmake." Tears fell from Elena's silver eyes. "I know," she said. "And I am so sorry." She reached out with her mind and showed the entity something it had never seen. Before she showed it memories from before the twisting. Memories of what the Kethvaran had been before they were corrupted into weapons. They had been beautiful once, creatures of light and thought who danced between stars and sang songs that made new worlds. And they had been twisted against their will into things of darkness and hunger, Elena showed the entity what it could have been, what it still might be, if anyone had the courage to try. The command entity fell silent for a long time when it spoke again. Its voice had changed. "We remember," it said, and the words held something that sounded almost like grief. "We remember what we were before they changed." The entity began to weep, a sound that echoed across the battlefield and froze every combatant on both sides. "End us," it begged. "Please end us. We are so tired of being monsters. We want to stop, but we cannot stop on our own." Elena stood before the ancient weapon and faced the hardest choice of her life. The war stopped in a single moment across the Threshold Nebula. Human ships and Kethvaran entities hung motionless in space. Waiting for something that none of them truly understood, Elena stood at the heart of the enemy command entity and faced a choice that would define humanity for all of eternity. The Kethvaran had asked to die, begged for the mercy of extinction, and every tactical analysis said that granting that request was the safest option. Kill them all and the threat ends forever. But Elena saw something else in the memory she carried, something her ancestors had missed in their desperation and fear. The Kethvaran were not just weapons. They were victims, twisted and corrupted against their will, forced to become monsters by beings who should have known better. She opened a channel to every ship in the Allied fleet. "Hold your fire," she commanded, and her voice carried the authority of 2,000,000 years of guilt. Admiral Chun was the first to respond. "Elena, we have them vulnerable," she said. "If we strike now, we can end this war forever." "I know," Elena replied. "And that is exactly what our ancestors tried to do. They fought and killed and buried and ran. And 2,000,000 years later, we are standing in the same place they stood." She turned to face the command entity, the vast mind that controlled all the Kethvaran, and she spoke words that changed everything. "We are not going to kill you," she said. The entity's confusion was a physical force that made Elena stagger. "You must," it said. "We cannot stop ourselves. We will continue to destroy until nothing remains. Then we will help you stop," Elena said. "We will find a way to undo what was done to you, to restore what you were before the twisting. That is impossible." "Maybe," Elena admitted, "but we have to try. Because killing you is what our ancestors did, and it did not work. And we are done running from our responsibilities." The Terran Congress convened 1 week later with representatives from every allied species and a direct link to the Kethvaran command entity. The debate lasted for 5 days. The Valeth demanded extinction, pointing to the trillions of their people who had died at Kethvaran hands, screaming that mercy was madness and compassion was weakness. Other species agreed, calling for humanity to use their ancient knowledge to destroy the enemy once and for all. The human representatives listened to every argument, and then Elena Vasquez stood to give her answer. "Our ancestors made the Kethvaran," she said. "They took beautiful beings and twisted them into weapons. And when those weapons turned on them, they buried the problem and ran away." She looked at the faces around her, alien and human alike. "They left us to inherit the guilt," she continued. "They left us to face the consequences of their actions. And for 2,000,000 years, that guilt has been sleeping in our blood." Her silver eyes swept across the assembly. "We could end the Kethvaran," she said. "We have the power and the knowledge, and no one would blame us for doing it. But that is what our ancestors did. They chose the easy path. They chose forgetting." She turned to face the screen showing the Kethvaran entity. "We are not going to forget anymore," she said. "We are going to heal what we broke. Even if it takes 1,000 years, even if it takes 10,000. Because we are done running from what we owe." The vote was close, but in the end, humanity's decision stood. The Kethvaran would not be destroyed. They would be rehabilitated. It was the hardest thing any species had ever attempted, teaching creatures designed for annihilation how to be something else. But humanity committed to the task with all the stubborn determination that had carried them from caves to stars. That first decade was Braltauran entities could not stop their hunger, could not control their need to destroy, and every attempt at communication ended in violence that cost thousands of lives. But humanity did not give up. They built containment zones where Kethvoran could exist without causing harm. They developed treatments that slowly unwound the corruption in their minds. They talked and listened and refused to treat the enemy as anything less than people who needed help 20 years after the war ended. The first breakthrough came a young Kethvoran entity, born in one of the containment zones. Woke up without the killing instinct that had defined its species for 2 million years. It looked at the stars not with hunger, but with wonder. And the first word it spoke was in halting human language. Friend Dr. Sarah Chun, granddaughter of Admiral Chun Wei-Lin, was there when it happened. And she held the newborn entity in her arms and wept with joy. "Hello, friend," she said. "Welcome to the universe." The news spread across the galaxy like fire. And for the first time since the war began, people allowed themselves to hope. The healing accelerated after that first success. More Kethvoran were born free of the corruption, and they helped to treat their elders, showing them that another way was possible. It took 300 years. But eventually, the last of the twisted ones was healed, and the species that had been weapons became something new. The Galactic Cooperative replaced the old Conclave, an alliance that included every species from the eldest Valeth to the youngest Kethvoran, with humanity serving not as rulers but as guides. When asked how a species so seemingly young could carry such ancient weight, the human ambassador simply smiled. "We are not young," she said. "We just forgot for a while. And forgetting does not erase responsibility. It just delays it." At the center of cooperative space, on the frozen moon of Thuro 7, the gate still stood in its chamber of ice. It no longer whispered warnings or secrets. It no longer held memories of ancient guilt. Instead, it sang a sound of joy and peace and hope that could be heard across the stars. A song of a species that had finally found the courage to face its mistakes and make them right. Elena Vasquez visited the gate one last time. Her silver eyes now faded back to brown. Her connection to the ancient memories finally released. She placed her hand on the surface of the gate and felt something she had not felt since the awakening. She felt free. "We did it," she whispered to the ghosts of her ancestors. "We finally did it," the gate sang in response. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Kethvoran sang with it. No longer weapons, but children of the stars, learning to dance between worlds as they had been meant to do from the beginning. Humanity had inherited the guilt of gods and chosen the hardest path of all, not vengeance, not destruction, not forgetting healing. And in doing so, they had proven what their ancestors had never understood. True strength was not the power to destroy your enemies. True strength was the courage to make them your friends.